You've been in a room full of people talking, and you didn't say a single word. Not because you had nothing to say. You had plenty. You were processing everything, noticing the tension between two people across the table, filing away the way someone laughed a little too loud when they felt insecure. You just didn't speak. And later, alone, you replayed the whole evening in your head like a film you were watching for the second time, catching details you missed on the first pass. And by the end of this, you will understand why your silence isn't a social flaw you need to fix, but one of the most psychologically sophisticated ways a human being can move through the world. There's a strange kind of suffering that comes with being a silent observer. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly in the gap between who you are in a room and who people assume you are. It shows up when someone fills your silence with their own interpretation and gets it completely wrong. You get called shy. You get called cold. You get called mysterious, which sounds like a compliment until you realize they mean it as a polite way of saying they can't read you, and that makes them uncomfortable. The conventional response to this discomfort, the one most self-help culture pushes, is to become more. Speak more. Share more. Open up more. Express yourself. Be present. Be louder. As if silence were a symptom of something broken that just needs the right kind of fixing. Albert Camus wrote, "Nobody realizes that some people expend tremendous energy merely to be normal." And I think about that line constantly, because what Camus was pointing at is the invisible labor of people who don't naturally fit the social template. The silent observer doesn't have a deficit. They have a different operating system. But we live in a culture that was designed by and for a very specific kind of person, and that person talks. Here is the paradox at the center of this video. The very qualities that make the silent observer perceptive, careful, attuned to nuance, and slow to judgment are the same qualities that the social world tends to pathologize. The more sensitive your antenna, the more the noise of ordinary social performance becomes overwhelming. And the more you pull back to process it, the more the world decides there's something wrong with you for pulling back. It's a trap built into the architecture of modern social life. And pushing through it by simply talking more doesn't resolve it. It just teaches you to perform a version of yourself that costs you enormous energy to maintain. Let's go deeper into what's actually happening psychologically, because this isn't just about personality type. It's about how the nervous system, the social brain, and even early attachment experiences converge in a particular kind of person. In 1998, psychologist Elaine Aron published her research on what she called the highly sensitive person, and the data was striking. Roughly 15 to 20% of the population, and this shows up across species, not just humans, has a nervous system that processes sensory and emotional information more deeply than average. Not more emotionally in the theatrical sense, more deeply, more layers, more time. These individuals notice subtler cues, feel the weight of a room when they walk in, and require more time after stimulating social situations to return to baseline. Aron was careful to point out, this is not pathology. It's a trait. It's been preserved across evolution because groups benefit from having individuals who think before they act, who notice what others miss. Then there's the research coming out of Susan Cain's work, drawing on decades of psychological literature on introversion. Cain, in her 2012 book, Quiet, cited studies showing that introverts' brains are more reactive to stimulation than extroverts' brains. It's not that introverts are less social. It's that the same level of environmental input, a party, a loud meeting, an open plan office, registers as higher intensity in the introvert's nervous system. They hit their optimal arousal point faster. After that point, more stimulation doesn't feel good. It feels like too much. But here's where it gets interesting and a little uncomfortable. Being a silent observer isn't just about sensory processing. There's something deeper going on. Research on what psychologists call self-monitoring shows that high self-monitors, people who are constantly aware of how they're being perceived, tend to adapt their presentation to social context more consciously than low self-monitors. The silent observer is often a high self-monitor who has become disillusioned with the game. They can see the performance happening all around them. They can see their own role in it. And something in them refuses to play along with the performance at full volume. Think of it this way. Imagine a city at night from a rooftop. If you're down in the street, you're inside the noise. You can't see the pattern. You're just navigating from block to block, reacting, performing, surviving. But if you're up on that roof, suddenly you can see the whole grid. You can see where the traffic is flowing, where it's backing up, what's really happening. The silent observer lives on the rooftop. The cost of that vantage point is that you're no longer in the street with everyone else. And humans are social animals. Being on the rooftop, even voluntarily, even because the street is genuinely overwhelming, carries its own loneliness. That loneliness is real. I'm not going to rush past it, because a lot of videos about introverts and highly sensitive people skip straight to, and that's actually a superpower. And while there's truth in that reframe, it can feel dismissive of the genuine ache that comes from never quite feeling like you belong to the ordinary social fabric the way other people seem to. You watch people throw themselves into conversations and come out energized, and some part of you wonders whether the problem isn't the world, but you. Whether maybe you should just try harder to be different. That's the wound, and it needs to be acknowledged before we can talk about the reframe. Carl Jung, who spent decades mapping the inner life, made the observation that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And I think the silent observer often carries a specific version of this terror. They accept their observations of others readily. They're often extraordinarily empathetic, perceptive, generous in their understanding of why people do what they do. But turning that same perceptive attention inward, accepting not just what they notice but what they are, that's where the difficulty lives. Because what they are doesn't fit the template. And there's a deep conditioning in most of us, reaching back to childhood, that tells us fitting the template is the price of belonging. Here is the reframe. And I want to be honest that this isn't a feel-good reversal where I tell you your weakness is secretly your strength and you close the tab feeling validated. This is more uncomfortable and more honest than that. The philosopher Aristotle made a distinction that I think is genuinely useful here. He distinguished between two kinds of knowing. There is episteme, which is theoretical knowledge, the kind you can read in a book or hear in a lecture. And there is phronesis, which is practical wisdom, the kind that only develops through lived experience, through observation, through sitting with complexity long enough that it starts to reveal itself to you. Aristotle argued that phronesis was the highest form of intelligence, not cleverness, not speed, but the capacity to perceive what is actually happening in all its nuance and contradiction and respond wisely. The silent observer, when they lean into their nature rather than fighting it, is in the process of developing phronesis. This is not the same as being passive. It's not the same as being disengaged. It's a specific kind of active engagement that happens below the surface of the conversation, in the space where most people are too busy talking to notice anything. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and founded logotherapy, wrote extensively about what he called the last of human freedoms, which is the freedom to choose one's attitude toward any given situation. Frankl noticed that in the most extreme conditions of dehumanization, the people who maintained their inner life, their inner witness, their capacity to observe their own experience without being consumed by it, were the ones most likely to endure with their humanity intact. The silent observer is someone who has, often without knowing it, been cultivating that inner witness for their entire life. The Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius, had a practice they called the view from above, sometimes translated as the overview effect. The idea was to mentally step back from any situation and see it from a broader perspective, the way you'd see the city from that rooftop. not to become detached or cold, but to act from a place of clarity rather than reaction. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. The silent observer doesn't need to be taught this practice. They've been doing it instinctively. The challenge isn't learning to observe. The challenge is learning to trust what they observe and to act from it. Because here is the thing that silent observers often get wrong about themselves. They assume their silence means they have nothing to contribute. They mistake their hesitation to speak for a lack of certainty. But most of the time, the silence isn't emptiness, it's fullness. It's the fullness of someone who has been listening so carefully that they know there's more in the room than what's being said, and they're waiting for the right moment to say the true thing. The tragedy is that the moment often passes because they waited too long, or because someone louder filled the space first. And then they carry it home, that unspoken thing, and it becomes another entry in the long catalog of what they almost said. Erich Fromm, the German-American psychologist and philosopher, wrote in The Art of Listening that most people think they are listening when they are actually just waiting for their turn to speak. That line is so sharp, it almost hurts. Because if you're a silent observer, you know exactly what he means. You've watched it happen in almost every conversation you've ever been in. You've seen people talk past each other, each one performing their own reality, without ever actually receiving the other person. And you actually listened. But because you listened instead of performing, you became invisible. So what do you do with this? How do you live as a silent observer in a world that was not designed for you, without either betraying yourself to fit in or retreating so far inward that you lose your connection to other people entirely? The first thing I'd invite you to consider is this. Become curious about the difference between chosen silence and defaulted silence. There is a version of silence that is active, grounded, intentional. You're quiet because you're genuinely processing, genuinely waiting, genuinely holding space. That kind of silence has dignity. It has weight. Then there is a silence that comes from fear of misstep, fear of being wrong, fear of not being articulate enough, fear of the social cost of speaking. That silence isn't chosen, it's defaulted into. And the difference matters enormously, not for how others perceive you, but for how you experience yourself. This isn't homework. It's just a question worth sitting with. The next time you're quiet in a room, ask yourself, am I here or am I hiding? There's no judgment in either answer, but knowing which one is true tells you something important. The second thing I want to offer is this. Your observations are data, not certainties, not final verdicts, but they're not nothing either. One of the traps that highly perceptive people fall into is what psychologists sometimes call meta-perception anxiety, which is the anxiety that comes from being aware of your own awareness. You notice so much that you start to distrust your own noticing because you know how complex everything is. You know how easily perception can be wrong. So you hold your observations very lightly, maybe too lightly, to the point where you never commit to them, never act on them, never speak them. There's a kind of intellectual humility that is genuinely wise. And then there's a kind of intellectual humility that is actually a form of self-erasure. Learning to tell the difference is some of the most important inner work a perceptive person can do. The philosopher Simone Weil, who wrote with extraordinary precision about attention, said that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. She wasn't talking about productivity or focus in the modern efficiency sense. She was talking about the act of genuinely attending to another person's reality, turning your whole self toward them, letting what they say actually land. That is what the silent observer does, often without credit, often without even recognizing it as a gift. The invitation here is to begin to recognize it as a gift, because when you do, you start to see that you have something genuinely valuable to offer, not in spite of your silence, but through it. The third thing, and this one is perhaps the hardest, is to find one person, just one, with whom you don't have to perform. Not a therapist, necessarily, though that's valuable too. Just a person in your life who has demonstrated that they can sit with complexity, who doesn't rush to fill silence with noise, who has shown you that they are actually curious about what you think rather than just waiting for their turn. If you have that person, invest in that relationship. Prioritize it. Because the loneliness of the silent observer is not about being alone. It's about being unseen. And even one person who genuinely sees you changes the texture of everything. If you don't have that person yet, I won't pretend that's an easy problem. But it's worth orienting toward. Because the goal isn't to become someone who talks more. The goal is to find the places and the people where your particular way of being in the world is not just tolerated, but understood. There's a concept in Japanese aesthetics called ma, written with a character that represents the negative space between things, the pause in music, the empty room before the furniture arrives, the silence between words. In Japanese art and architecture, ma is not considered absence. It's considered a presence in itself. It's the space that gives meaning to what surrounds it. Without ma, there's just noise. The silent observer is, in some deep way, a living embodiment of ma. You are the pause that gives meaning to the conversation. You are the witness that makes the event real. Without you in the room, something would be missing that no one could quite name. That's not a small thing. That's not a consolation prize. That is a genuine, irreplaceable function in the ecology of human connection. Rainer Maria Rilke, one of the great German poets, wrote in his Letters to a Young Poet, and this line has stayed with me for years. I would like to beg you, dear sir, as well as I can, to have patience with everything unresolved in your heart and to try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Don't search for the answers, which could not be given to you now because you would not be able to live them. And the point is, to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. That, I think, is the most honest thing I can say to you about being a silent observer. Not that it will all make sense soon. Not that your particular way of moving through the world will one day be rewarded, but that the act of staying present to your own perceptions, continuing to observe honestly and carefully, continuing to resist the pressure to perform a version of yourself that costs more than it's worth, that itself is a kind of courage. A quiet courage, the kind that doesn't get applause, the kind that matters anyway. If this is the kind of conversation you want more of, subscribing means you won't miss the next one. These are the questions I keep coming back to, and I'd rather explore them with you than alone. And I'm genuinely curious about this. When was the last time your silence said something that words couldn't have? Leave it in the comments. I read them.